This morning after a suspected technical snag was reported and the flight made a U-turn and landed safely at the Hong Kong airport around 9:29 a.m.
Air India flight. This is another Air India flight. AI315, which was en route from Hong Kong to Delhi, was forced to return to its origin after the pilot suspected a technical issue mid-air.
4 days after a Dreamliner exploded, another Boeing 787 almost fell from the sky. Because of filthy jet fuel, nobody bothered to check. And guess what? It's not just in India. It could be in any plane, anywhere in the world right now. So stick around, because by the end, we'll show you the 1 rupee fix that can stop the next mid-air fireball, and it's gonna blow your mind. June 16, 2025, just 4 days after the deadly AI-171 crash, another Air India Dreamliner quietly dodged disaster, and almost nobody outside the aviation world noticed. Flight AI-315 pushed back from Hong Kong at 12:17 p.m., bound for Delhi with 236 passengers and crew. At first, everything felt normal. Takeoff roll, positive climb, flaps up. But as the jet leveled out around 22,000 feet, the cockpit lit up with a warning light pilots dread. Fuel pressure low, right engine. The crew keyed the mic to Hong Kong ATC. On the publicly archived radio feed, you can hear the calm but urgent call. We have a fuel filter problem on the right engine. Request vectors back to Hong Kong. In plain English, the pilots were saying, something is clogging the fuel line that feeds this $17,500,000 GNX turbine, and we don't trust it to keep running. So, what exactly is a fuel filter, and why can it wreck a jet engine? Think of it like the strainer in your kitchen sink, except it sits between the fuel tanks and the engine's brain, the fuel metering unit. Its only job is to trap dirt, water droplets, or even tiny microbes that grow in stale jet fuel. If that mesh blocks up, fuel pressure collapses, the bypass valve might open, and the engine can flame out. Inside the cockpit, the crew ran the checklist, confirm the warning, reduce thrust, balance fuel pumps. But the numbers on the screen kept dipping. Rather than gamble 6 more hours across the Bay of Bengal, the captain spun the Dreamliner into a slow right-hand turn, a U-turn at 22,000 feet, and headed back toward Chek Lap Kok. Airport staff were alerted, ambulances rolled, and passengers probably felt only a subtle bank and slight descent. At 1:15 p.m. local, the jet touched down safely on runway 25R. Total flight time, barely 1 hour. Air India issued a short press release saying the plane returned due to a technical issue. That's technically true, but also very vague. Flight tracking data shows the aircraft began descending almost the moment the warning sounded, backing up the theory that the fuel pressure problem was serious, not just a flickering sensor. Aviation geeks and pilots hanging out on forums and channels like Simple Flying quickly filled in the blanks. Many pointed to a clogged fuel filter as the most likely culprit, noting that earlier 787 service bulletins have warned airlines to watch for microbial sludge in warmer, humid regions. Others shared links to real-time ATC recordings and satellite plots, all telling the same story. The right engine wasn't happy, and the crew didn't wait around to see if the left one would misbehave too. Why didn't this near miss make prime-time news? Simple. 4 days earlier, AI-171 had exploded after takeoff from Ahmedabad, killing more than 240 people. Media attention stayed glued to the crash, courtrooms, and compensation debates. A safe landing, even one caused by the same suspected dirty fuel problem, just couldn't compete. After the horrifying crash of Air India Flight 171, everyone, from the media to the public to aviation experts, wanted answers. What went so wrong that a brand new Boeing 787 packed with 242 people could lose both engines and fall out of the sky just seconds after takeoff? Now, weeks later, the investigation is still going, but we've finally got a timeline of what's been uncovered so far. On June 17th, just 5 days after the crash, the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and the flight data recorder, FDR, were sent to Delhi for analysis. By June 24th, investigators from India's AAIB, Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, had already finished downloading the data. They then briefed the DGCA, India's aviation regulator, about the early findings. Then, on July 8th, a leak from someone close to the investigation made headlines. The leak said that fuel control switches on the flight deck had been moved abruptly just before the crash. Now, that's a big deal, because it suggests either something went wrong with the controls or a pilot did something in panic. Then, on July 9th, both Barron's and Reuters covered the update. And believe it or not, the moment Boeing's name came up, its stock price jumped 0.7%, which just shows how closely Wall Street watches these investigations. So, what does all this actually mean? Basically, the investigators now have to figure out what caused the engines to shut down. They must rule out a few possibilities before giving us a final answer. Was there a mechanical jam in the fuel system? Could it have been an electrical short or a glitch in the onboard computers? Did the pilot accidentally switch off the wrong controls? Or was it fuel starvation caused by dirty fuel or a clogged filter? There's a possible chain of events that many aviation experts believe might have led to the crash of AI-171, and it goes like this. First, the plane takes off with dirty fuel that may contain tiny particles, water, or even microbial sludge. That dirty fuel flows through the system and starts to clog the engine's fuel filters, restricting the normal flow. As the filter gets blocked, fuel pressure drops sharply. The engine detects this drop and reacts automatically. Then, the Fuel Control Unit, or FCU, steps in. It senses the low pressure and cuts or limits fuel flow to prevent engine damage. The pilots notice the issue and try to manually fix it, but at this point, the damage is already done. Both engines start to sputter, losing power. Then, in just a few seconds, the flames go out completely. A total dual-engine flameout. With no engine power, the aircraft's systems shut down, and the emergency ram air turbine, or RAT, deploys. But at such low altitude and with no time left, there's almost nothing the pilots can do. Most people think planes just get filled up like cars at a petrol pump. But the aviation fuel supply chain is way more complex. First, fuel is produced at a refinery, where the initial batch is tested for quality. From there, it either travels through a pipeline or is trucked by tankers to the airport depot, which is like a giant fuel warehouse. Next, it's moved through underground hydrant systems to the refueler trucks, and finally pumped into the aircraft's fuel tanks. Now here's the important part. Fuel is supposed to be tested at 4 different points: at the refinery, before storage at the airport depot, before it enters the refueler truck, and just before uplift into the aircraft. Ground crew usually do this using a tool called a hydrometer to check fuel density and spot contamination. But here's where the problem begins. In 2024 to 2025, India's aviation regulator's internal audit found that 17 major airports failed their hydrometer calibration checks. That means they were using faulty or unverified tools to test fuel quality. Tools that could easily miss problems like water contamination or microbial growth. Even worse, 6 airports were caught with fuel samples containing more than 30 parts per million of suspended water, which is way above the safe limit. And yes, water and fuel can freeze at high altitudes and block fuel flow, which is terrifying for obvious reasons. Another big issue is cost cutting. Companies like Indian Oil and Bharat Petroleum often outsource hydrant pit maintenance to private contractors who are paid as little as $1.05 per hour. These workers are expected to manage fuel lines, pumping 3,000 liters per minute. And if something as tiny as a 0.058 rubber O-ring is cracked, missing, or installed wrong, it can let dirt or water into the fuel system. Basically, a tiny mistake during fueling can contaminate thousands of liters of fuel being pumped into a $116,700,000 aircraft. If we look at the market, India's aviation fuel is dominated by IOCL, BPCL, and HPCL. A quick pie chart would show IOCL handling around 65% of the supply, followed by BPCL and HPCL taking the rest. These companies do run strict quality programs, but with so many layers, things can still slip through the cracks. And this isn't just theory. There have been real cases where dirty fuel caused problems. In 2023, a SpiceJet Q400 had to replace its engine after microbial growth was found in the fuel system. In October 2024, a Vistara A320neo was delayed for 8 hours because of water contamination in the fuel tanks. And of course, we already discussed AI-315, a near miss caused by a clogged fuel filter. The plane had to return mid-air because of pressure issues, most likely from bad fuel. According to IATA's Global Safety Report, only 4% of aviation accidents are directly caused by fuel problems. But when they do happen, they're usually catastrophic. Planes can survive many things, like bird strikes or rough landings. But when fuel flow stops, you're basically flying a giant glider with no power. And gliders don't usually carry 200+ people over cities. Fuel problems in airplanes aren't just an Indian issue. They've caused some of the scariest incidents in aviation history around the world. If we look at global examples, it becomes very clear that when fuel goes wrong, the results are often deadly. Let's start with British Airways Flight 38 in 2008. This was a Boeing 777 coming in to land at Heathrow Airport in London after a long flight from Beijing. Everything seemed fine until the very end. Just moments before touchdown, both engines lost power. The pilots couldn't increase thrust, and the plane crash-landed just short of the runway. Luckily, everyone survived, but it was a close call. The investigation showed that ice crystals had formed inside the fuel during the cold cruise at high altitude. When the plane started to descend, the ice melted, flowed into the fuel oil heat exchangers, and blocked them, cutting fuel flow to the engines. This case became a wake-up call for the whole world. Ice in fuel isn't just a theory. It can actually shut down both engines in a split second. Then there's the tragic story of Aeroflot Nord Flight 821, also in 2008 in Russia. This plane crashed while trying to land in bad weather, killing all 88 people on board. Investigators found that one of the main causes was water contamination in the fuel system. Water had been sitting inside the fuel tanks, and during descent, it shifted and caused the engines to lose thrust. On top of that, poor pilot training and wrong responses made the situation worse. But again, the starting point was fuel that was supposed to be safe. Another crazy but true story comes from way back in 1983 with Eastern Airlines Flight 855. This was a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar flying over the Atlantic Ocean when all 3 of its engines shut down due to fuel starvation. The pilots had just taken off from Miami and were on their way to the Bahamas when one by one the engines started failing. The cause? Maintenance crews had installed the wrong O-rings, leading to fuel leaks. The pilots managed to restart one engine at just 12,500 feet and safely return to Miami. But that incident showed how a tiny maintenance mistake can cause all engines to fail in the middle of the sky. If something goes wrong, investigators can see exactly where the fuel came from, who tested it, and when. No more guessing games. So, what do you think? Do you think airlines should publicly release their fuel test results? Let us know in the comments. And subscribe to our channel for more videos like this.